Hello, I'm Scott Wheatley. I've always had an interest in history, from pretty much anything prehistoric to where we are today. It's pretty much the study of man's greatest endeavours to man's greatest mistakes. Um, so my main thoughts of this one would be tolerance and pretty much lack of tolerance. As we know, we saw the atrocities of World War Two and what Hitler did, and how Hitler just had no fear or pretty much no scruples in what he did, in how he was just happy to attack pretty much anyone in any way. Um, you know, it. Let's look at what he did with the Jews. And how many Jewish people he killed. I think it was around 6 million in the Holocaust. And then he didn't stop with the Jews. He went towards homosexuals, and he also went towards the gypsies. So it's like that's three groups of people he went towards, and he would have stopped. I don't think he would have stopped there. He would have went. I think once he got rid of those, he would have went towards the Czechs, probably the Poles. I think if Germany would have won World War Two, then Europe as we know it would essentially be Germany or Aryan land, maybe, I don't know. Um, there would be no culture as we know it. It would all just be white. There'd be white, blonde, blue-eyed people everywhere. There'd be no race, no culture. I think the thing is with Hitler is he wanted everything to be the way he wanted it and the way he liked it, the way he saw it, and which, let's face it, we know that's wrong. And I think, you know, as someone who's born in the 80s, it's hard for me to imagine. But I guess, the main we'd probably be all speaking German now, wouldn't we? And we'd probably be all wearing lederhosen, who knows? But how different from what we know now, I don't know. Would we even know? In a case, you could look at it from a philosophical point of view. Would we even know it's wrong? Because we'd been brought up. It'd been how we'd been brought up. We wouldn't know any different, would we? We'd been brought up in this weird, sort of strange world where we're all blonde and blue-eyed, and anything that's different is not seen as okay. And I think we're all different. We've all got our scruples, and I think that's something that the human race should celebrate. Actually, is being different. And I think, in my opinion, that's probably where the major difference would be. I think it'd be a very strange world where everything is just the same. So the Cold War is. I always find the Cold War strange, really, because in a way it's kind of a war. The war what never happened. You've got two superpowers, the USA and Russia, both having nuclear arms, and it always makes me think of basically. It might sound a little bit rude, but essentially two men holding each other's testicles, and if one squeezes, the other one's going to squeeze harder, and the other one's going to squeeze. And essentially, you're not going to get a winner, because whoever's first to press the button, the second person's going to press the button very quickly after, and all you're going to have is a mess. Just two nuclear bombs essentially blowing everyone up. So, when it comes to the question, what would happen if the Cold War never happened, then you've got to look at it in two ways. That, if the Cold War never happened, you're asking America and Britain to essentially ignore everything that happened behind what they called the Iron Curtain. Essentially, if it never happened, everything that happened in Russia would have just turned a blind eye to. So communism, who knows where communism would have spread to? You know, we know it spread east. It went into Asia. Would it have leapt over the Iron Curtain? Would it have came west? You know, would more Europe have gone communism? Would it have fell the same time it did? But then on the other hand, would the USA and the UK would they have been more powerful if the Cold War never happened? Would they have just carried on going on, building their army? Who knows? I think the difference would lie with Germany. What would have happened with Germany? Obviously, with the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was actually a key part of the Cold War. You know, being split after the Second World War. You know, would the Berlin Wall have come down sooner if it wasn't for the Cold War? Would it have stayed longer? I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Vietnam is an interesting one because, as many said before, it was the first war fought in your living room. For many people, it was really, I think, for many everyday normal people, it was the first time they ever really saw the atrocities of war. They actually saw what war could do. They saw what war was. I think it disgusted a lot of people. It's like you look back at some of this, the famous image of the girl running down the street who's essentially been napalmed and she has no skin. It's a powerful image, you know. If you look back at World War One, everyone at home were all, you know, tally ho, let's keep going, because they didn't know truly what was going on in Belgium. But then when it came to Vietnam, suddenly everyone was watching it in their living room, and you had these essentially 18. Well, they were boys, you know, 18. They just left college, and they were going to Vietnam to fight for Uncle Sam, fight for the American way, the American dream, to try and end capitalism. And you wonder how much these American boys really knew about the spread of communism, and how much they knew the threat of Russia at the time, because they went into this country, and you know what? Yeah, they had the guns and they had the technology, but what they weren't ready for was the Vietnamese. Well, they were all trained in guerrilla warfare. You know, they were there. You know, they had their sticks in a forest, and they knew completely how to fight the Americans, and the Americans had no clue. So I think it shocked a lot of people into what actually happens during war. And if it never happened, then, well, maybe people would still be ignorant to the atrocities of war. Maybe people would still be unaware of what war really is. And then you've got to look at Vietnam itself. You know, what would have happened? Okay, the French left, and then communists spread, and then the Americans came in. Would much have changed in Vietnam? Probably not. It would have probably just went communist, you know. Really, America just didn't want communism spreading anymore. And that's kind of why they went there, if we actually look at the gist of it. And the amount of Agent Orange they sent and put on the crops and completely destroyed the crops in Vietnam. You know, I still believe they're having trouble growing in parts of Vietnam now. You know, they completely obliterated parts of that country, and all for the threat of communism. And you know, you've got to feel a bit of sympathy for the Vietnamese people, you know, because at the end of the day, they were just doing what the government was telling them to do. and you just got to. I think Vietnam was something that we could all learn from, you know. So 9/11, I think we can probably all remember where we were the day 9/11 happened. I still remember I was doing my paper round, and every house I delivered to, I could just see glimpses of it on the TV screen. I think it was the one day everyone was watching the same thing. So I think my first thought with 9/11, if it didn't happen, was actually Islamophobia. But before 9/11, Islamophobia wasn't really a thing. Well, it was. I'm sure it was a thing, but it was much more, you know, much more left field. It was something we didn't really hear about so much. You know, we all knew Islam as a religion, but did we really ever see it as an actual threat? You know, I was, again, as I said earlier, I was born in the 80s, and I remember growing up. The threat of terrorism, main threat of terrorism, was from the Irish. It was from the IRA, and then suddenly we had this new sort of you could almost call him a boogeyman in Osama bin Laden. Now, personally, I don't think Osama bin Laden represents Islam as much as I don't think Nick Griffin represents Christianity. I think Osama bin Laden is a very evil, calculated person, and by attacking the World Trade Center at 9/11, he put the USA into a position of going to war with Afghanistan, which you could then argue led to the war against Saddam Hussein, or the war on terror, which is another story in itself, which we won't go into. But I just remember pretty much weeks after 9/11, the fear of Muslims and the fear of Islam was just, it almost came out of nowhere. I'd never really seen it before. And in my opinion, 9/11, it caused the uprising in the right wing. And I feel this is where the BNP and things like the National Front, the English Defence League, they tapped in to people's ignorance and to their fear. And I think this is why, specifically up north, where there's a lot more Muslim societies, communities rather, I feel they really tapped into the fear of people's ignorance. And I think this is, personally, I kind of feel if 9/11 didn't happen, I don't think we would have as much ignorance in the world as we do now, and I don't think we would have as much fear in the world. I think 9/11 certainly made us look at things in a complete different way. It made us realise how much family and love is important. But on that hand, I think we need to remember that it wasn't Muslims that caused 9/11. It was Islamic terrorists, extremists, and I don't think they're the same thing. And I remember a joke. I remember a joke at the time. Someone said to me that it's funny how not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. And I just felt it was the most ignorant thing someone could say, because, you know, there's plenty of terrorists in the world who are not Muslims. You got ETA in Spain. There's plenty of militia groups in Africa and in China. But suddenly we just had this idea that if you were if you're Arabic or Persian and you had a beard and you wore a turban, suddenly you have to be feared. And it upsets me because I know, and I think that people are naturally good, and I do think there are people who don't really think this, but because they don't have enough education on other religions, I feel that they believe people like Nick Griffin and I can't remember the idiot's name from the English Defence League, Tommy, what's his name, but I do feel 9/11 certainly led to a rise of ignorance with people of different religion, and I do feel if 9/11 didn't happen, I do feel we wouldn't have had the surge in right-wing politics that we had in the late 90s and early 2000s. That's the big question, isn't it? You look at Adam and Eve, and obviously Adam and Eve, they had it perfect. You know, they were literally walking in the midday sun with God himself. They had this utopia, this beautiful, wonderful, amazing garden where they could have all the needs they could ever want. Everything was taken care of. So then you ask me what would have happened if they never ate the forbidden fruit. Well, for a start, we wouldn't be here now, would we? We would be, well, hopefully, we'd be walking in the garden with Jesus, well, not Jesus, sorry, with God himself. But you look, in a way, it's where sin, you know, that's where sin came into the world. Everything was perfect up until then. And then suddenly, they have the fruit. They're cast out. And suddenly, the Bible begins, really. The story begins of Jesus, I keep saying Jesus, sorry. The story begins of God trying to find out what went wrong, really. I think when I read the Bible, it makes me think it's God and man trying to find redemption. It's man trying to find redemption with God again, but also God trying to have that relationship with us, which he once had. Because when the fruit was had, sin entered in the world. And obviously God, being a pure, sinless being and a perfect being, the only way he could really have a relationship with us again was to bring his son, Jesus, down to us. And obviously in doing that, he almost made himself imperfect. This is what's so great about the story, is how Jesus was God made flesh. You know, it says in John, first there was the Word, and then the Word became flesh, and how God was willing to actually bring himself to us, because even though we made that mistake, it was man that made the mistake in eating the apple. God realises we're his creation still, and he wants that relationship with us. We once had that, and we messed that up. So if we never sinned, we'd have had that perfect relationship with God. But then, how interesting would our life be? What could we actually do? Would we just all be just frolicking around in the Garden of Eden, having fun all day? You know, something at the end of the day. Good things can never last forever. There's always got to be something. Something always comes in to ruin it. And, you know, none of us would be here. At the end of the day, none of us would probably be here, would we? If it wasn't for Eve eating the apple. So it's a massive question what the world would be like. Because on one hand, yes, it would be superb and be lovely. Heavenly. But would we really actually be living? What would we be actually doing? Would we be existing? You know, we wouldn't have any trials or tribulations. We wouldn't know what it would be like to be alive almost. We'd never feel pain. So could we even truly appreciate what we was experiencing if we never felt pain or we never felt sin?